All right. And up next, we're thrilled to have Rich Mironov with us. He's a longtime product executive, coach, and author, here to dive into the challenge of balancing revenue pressures with long-term product goals. Over to you, Rich.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I want to just frame the discussion briefly, which is, as you heard, I've been in the product game for a pretty long time. That was six venture capital backed B2B software startups, and then about 15 interim gigs as an interim chief product officer. These days, mostly I'm coaching chief product officers and product leaders. And there's one of the issues that comes up all the time that we're going to tackle here that's very consistent and very frustrating is that we, on the product engineering and design side, or the maker side, as I sometimes call it, and our go to market executive partners, sales, marketing, finance, usually we're fundamentally misaligned in how we set goals and how we talk about goals and how products contribute or seem to contribute to the larger company context. For example, most of the go-to-market leaders I work with don't understand why product folks aren't laser focused on near-term revenue, current quarter, and why we can't commit to how much money an upcoming feature or product decision or capability will add quarters or years from now. Of course, I'm generalizing wildly. There's some great go-to-market leaders who deeply care about engineering, but not so much. And on the other side, we as product and engineering and design leaders feel like the revenue targets are pretty arbitrary. They're often in a strategic vacuum, and it's really hard to connect those revenue goals to what we're building or the metrics we can move. So I see this as a systematic problem, not just about some one executive or name calling. And so approaching it from the product side, as most of you are on the product side, but with a lot of love and empathy and respect for our go-to-market partners. So I want to walk through a couple of tools I've used to bridge the language gap, and that helps us then make smarter trade-offs at the executive level. Okay, here goes. So this may be obvious, it may not be obvious, but it turns out that revenue goals aren't the same as product goals. In fact, we tend to assume, or at least the go-to-market side tends to assume, that setting a revenue target makes it easy for us to figure out what to do. On the product side, knowing that the company wants to make more money isn't very helpful to make trade-offs or feature decisions or roadmap choices or the things that we have to do in order to deliver that money. Right. So putting that in language terms, what I'd say is the go-to-market side of our companies tend to use the revenue language around goals, right? We need to make another 140 million euros, whatever currency you're in. And in general, the folks leading marketing, sales, and other go-to-market functions aren't very good at and aren't very interested in assigning that out by product or capability or product or figuring out which things are going to lead to money. And then for me, since I've spent most of my career in B2B enterprise, which for me is average ticket prices of 100,000 to a few million, there's usually a few really big, really important deals every quarter. We all know who they are or what they are. And it turns out that there's tremendous, tremendous pressure to close those because otherwise we have to fire people. And there's almost always one or two little tiny features which pop up very late in the cycle, which aren't little and aren't tiny, and hold up the deal. And so escalated to the CEO is the chance to agree to some things that we haven't sized and haven't understood in order to close the big deals that the board of directors is busy asking the CEO about every single day. Right. So that's the reality on the go to market side, that the goals are revenue, and whichever products bring them in, that's just fine. Right. On the product side, we really want to have goals that we can control, that we understand, that we can move. Usage workflows, you see them, scalability, quality, things that we're able to move the needle on. And hint, since we're not actually in charge of the selling or marketing functions, saying that we're going to be the people who drive revenue when sales doesn't work for us and marketing doesn't work for us, um, that's a real challenge. And we see it, but often the rest of the company doesn't see it. So I want to frame that up because these are really, I think, fundamental distinctions, and they're not just about education. So I want to take us on a side trip for a minute and tell you a story. So here's a guy, and I don't know if you've ever met him, but if you've been at a cocktail party or a social engagement, here you can see he's got a golf logo on his shirt. And in this case, this is a guy who's really, really excited and fascinated by golf. And what he really wants to do is to corner you in a room, in a corner of the event or the cocktail party, whatever it is, and he wants to educate you for the next 20 or 30 minutes about American golf courses versus Scottish golf courses and who's on the leaderboard and wearing the green jacket and old versus new equipment, on and on and on and on. Turns out I'm not at all a golf fan. And what I want to do in that situation is chew my leg off and escape somehow. Right. And again, we've been in that party where it's somebody who wants to lecture us about Star Wars versus Star Trek or international politics or green technology and climate change or whatever it is. The important thing here is he's really eager to spend a lot of time explaining to us about something we're really not that interested in. Now, why did I take us aside here for this? Um, it's my strong belief and assertion that when we, as product and engineering and design folks, pull our marketing and sales and go-to-market folks aside and insist that we're going to educate them about the details of product operating models or sprints or backlogs or decision frameworks, we are this guy because mostly to the most effect, the folks on the go-to-market side aren't very interested in how we build stuff or what tools we're using or agile and scrum and safe and whatever else we're doing. They just really want to hear about when it's going to arrive and how much money it's going to make, right? And so we need to understand our audience in the same way that we understand our audience when we're building products for our end users and know who's interested in this thing. And in fact, the bigger takeaway for me is that I see over and over again that when we, as product and engineering and design leads, talk with the go to market side about generic product processes, it sounds like excuses. So let's dig into a couple of those. Again, say it again. Generic process language to someone who just wants to get the thing they want sound like excuses. Here's a few phrases you might have said. I know I've said them thousands of times over the years, right? I'm sorry. I know you want this thing for this really big deal, but there's no slack in the engineering plan and our priorities are already set and we're busy and here's the roadmap, so you can't have it, right? Now, all of that may in fact be completely true, but to someone who's trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal, it sure sounds like an excuse. And the very next thing that happens is it gets escalated over our heads to the CEOs, right? What else do we say? We say, we're agile. If you need something, fill out this backlog form. Now, on the one hand, it's a lot of work and they really aren't interested except filling in the, as little as possible. But almost everybody at your company knows that almost every one of those backlog forms goes into the hopper and very few get any response at all. And almost a tiny fraction of those, maybe zero, come back with a commitment and a date, which is what they wanted, right? So the We're Agile fill out a backlog form sounds like we're postponing, sounds like an excuse, sounds like we're not interested in what they're doing. What else do we have here? Yes. Before we can size and schedule this, we need to really understand the customer problem. All of us have done this, serious discovery, technical meetings. Let's dig into the API. From the sales side, it can be very insulting because they've been working with this customer for a year. And the way we pitch this is you don't really understand the problem. We have to start from scratch. Now, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But again, notice that the generic language of process here doesn't land very well. I think we have one more, right? Product wasn't designed to do that. That's fine, sure. But we have somebody who's going to write us a check for 6 or 7 figures, and it better do what it needs to do or they'll figure it out, right? And the reason I'm going through these is because in general, over and over again, what I hear from our go-to-market partners is they hear the R&D process description or discussion as the reason they can't have what they need. So more than twice over the last some number of months, I've heard the head of sales or head of marketing tell me that if we could just get rid of all the product managers, we could get to the engineers faster, give them the post-it note with the specs on it, and get what our customers need sooner, right? We're not being necessarily viewed as value add, but roadblocks, right? Not the way to get a seat at the table, not to be important in the discussions and the choices that are going to drive the company forward, right? And so the way I crystallize this for my CPO coachees is to say, in general, not always, but in general, the go-to-market executives at your company can't hear anything you say unless the sentence includes a currency symbol. right? So let's put that in big letters because I think it's worth repeating. Again, wildly generalizing and making fun of everybody in the game here, but I'll tell you that for the most part, go-to-market leaders can't hear the things we say unless it includes a currency symbol because that's how they're measured and that's what's important in their day. Okay, so what we need, clearly, we need a common language and it must include money. Because you know what? Much of the company is really interested in hearing about money rather than development processes. So I'm going to introduce a concept here that I call money stories. No surprise. Okay. So a money story, which is not a user story and is not about what the functionality of the product is going to be or what the users are going to do with it. It's a story. It's a simple story about our vague guess, our guesstimation or throwing of a dart of how much something's going to be worth to the company if we do it in the future. Right now, clearly we can't be accurate, but we have to have this conversation rather than the technical conversation so that we can get to the real issue that the company cares about, right? And here's the rules, or here's my process for money stories, right? They're simple swags, right? They're guesses, they're estimates, they're not financial projections, they're not commitments. We can't tell a year from now how much something's really going to be worth, but we're going to guess. And no more than three numbers, and the only activity we do is we multiply them. Everybody at the table understands. And they're a really good way, we'll see, to quick estimate whether one thing is much bigger than another or something's even worth exploring. Right. So I'm going to say this again, I think. It's a good way to highlight how we think about how we're going to make money with some activity on the product engineering design side. Not exactly how much it is, but it clarifies our thinking, it writes it down, and the other folks at the table can now understand why we're doing the things we're doing and what choices they might make that are different from that, right? So this is like a user story. It's going to explain why we're going to do something, but it's in money terms. Okay, so let's do a couple. They're not going to be that complicated from a math point of view, but you'll see where we're going. Okay, let's tell the upsell money story. Every product person I've ever worked with, including me, has told this story innumerable times. So let's tell the qualitative side of the story, right? I believe that if we can add cool feature X to our product, and let's assume we're in some tiered subscription model here, good, better, best, bronze, silver, gold, basic, premium, whatever it is, we're going to claim that if we could add a feature to the silver tier or the premium tier, a bunch of folks who are buying the bronze or basic tier will come up with some more money and pay us more money to get this cool feature. Notice I didn't specify what it was because right now we're talking about the money, not the tech, right? And it's not a complete sentence because there's no money in it. So let's do the basic math, right? Okay, so in order to guess what this is going to be worth, and we're in euros today, so that's the picture, right? So we probably know how many bronze customers we have. We probably have a good idea of what the upsell price from bronze to silver is. And then we're going to guesstimate, we're going to take a wild stab at what portion of those bronze customers might in the first year upgrade because of this cool new feature, right? Not so hard. Now, it's hard to do. It's easy to compute, right? So it would look like this. Okay, we have 3,000 customers, and the upcharge to get from bronze to silver is 900 euros a year. And here's the big leap. And based on little or no evidence and some CRM looks and interviewing some salespeople, I think we might get between 1% and 4% of our customers to upsell. Okay. Is that right? I don't know. We can now argue this with our sales and marketing friends and say, well, is it 10 or 0.06 or 90%, right? The getting within a factor of 3, 4, 5, 6 is plenty here. And if we multiply, right, we see that this money story suggests that we might collect next year something between 25 and 100,000 euros. Accurate? No. But I believe that we could guess within 3, 4, 5% what that's going to happen. And it's a really good skill to have, right? Notice what we're doing here is we're getting out in front of the work. We do this before we start the engineering team, before we do the deep dive, before we spend the money on building this. because maybe it's not worth doing, or maybe it's much bigger or smaller than something else we're considering. I've trained a lot of product managers on this. Once we get any good at it, any one of us can do a quick and dirty estimate like this in under 4 minutes. So it's real time in the meeting. If it's small, we set it aside and move on. Okay, let's do one more just for the fun of it, right? The reduced churn money story. We've all told this story. I think we're in pounds right now, right? So this is the story that says, okay, we got a big problem P, whatever it is, outages, something, right? And if we could fix that problem, we'd keep a lot of customers from canceling their contracts. That would reduce churn, increase renewals. Notice it lacks money, it lacks outcome, it lacks interest on the part of our marketing and sales friends, and it lacks commitment that they're going to help us do this. Okay, so let's do the math. In fact, I think this one's easier, right? We're going to guesstimate how many customers quit last year because of this problem P, whatever it was. And I bet my salespeople are going to give me those first 20 names because they're all over me on this. And there's an average sales price for a product. And when we multiply those together, we get a vague order of magnitude guesstimate for what this reduced churn story might be worth. Here's some numbers, right? We think we lost 50 or 100 customers last year. They pay us 8,000 pounds a year. Do the multiplication. Gosh, is 400 to 800,000 pounds a lot? I don't know, but now we're talking the language of the people who we're going to make decisions with and set priorities with, right? So again, what we're doing is we're moving it from read my tech, read my specs to do you care? And what else might we do? Right. So there's our upsell story. There's our money story. Another way to think about this is what I call count the digits, right? So count the digits says in 3 minutes or less, we around the table should be able to figure out, is this a 4-digit idea, a few $1,000s a year? Is it a 6-digit idea, hundreds of thousands of euros or whatever your currency is a year? Is it an 8-digit idea? It's worth tens of millions a year. I will tell you that somebody from my side and somebody from the go-to-market side can guess the number of digits in 2 minutes, right? And we can pretty quickly figure out that the 4-digit ideas aren't interesting enough for sales and marketing to spend any time on, right? Is it accurate? No, it's not accurate, but it's really, really handy in grouping things, comparing things, rough sorting opportunities, and getting everybody on the same page as to why we're going to do something and what kind of participation they might have. Okay, one last way to phrase this before we wrap to the last bit here. I'm going to call it finishing our money sentences, right? So finishing our sentences means we don't just tell the qualitative technology side of it. We put a currency symbol in, right? So again, just a couple of quick examples, right? Gee, at our company, churn's at 40%. That's costing us 65 million a year. I don't know why. We think that our brilliant designers and engineers can do a bunch of onboarding work and usage work that could boost renewals and cut churn. Half a sentence. Right? There's nobody in the executive room in the executive meeting who's going to let us assign some folks to work on this because we haven't talked about an outcome. So let's finish the sentence. We think, we're guessing, our wild idea is that we might be able to cut churn by 4 to 8% if we did this set of things. And now we can multiply. Gosh, 6 to 12 million a year, is that a lot? I don't know, but it's probably more than we need to justify putting a team on this for a couple of quarters and seeing if we can deliver that kind of money. And even more than that, probably more important, is it's enough to keep that team staying on the work as the next 15 interrupts come in from the field, because everybody recognizes that we don't want to interrupt them unless we've got something else that's worth maybe 6 or maybe 12 million. Right? Okay, one more just to round it out. Fixing that data import problem will keep customers from canceling subscriptions. We did that one already, right? So, okay, how many did we lose? We lost, you know, 60 to 100. They're worth 8,000 a year. We multiply. Is it a big number? Don't know. But now we're having the big kid conversation about money and goals, and we can hold our heads up high and say, this is either worth doing or it's not worth doing. Okay, last thought, and then we'll take some questions. You guys all know this, but I'll tell you that very, very few go-to-market execs believe it's true, which is every choice we make on the product side is an or choice. You can have the thing on the roadmap, or We can replace it with the thing you're asking for. Now, all of the go-to-market execs I work with, or most of them, believe in the existence of the and choice, which says, oh, let's do everything on the roadmap and squeeze two more things into the sprint. By the way, every single exec has a short list of 50 or 60 or 70 small things that they'd like to squeeze in, right? So another way to say that is we can never build as fast as we can dream. In fact, we can never build as fast as customers call up our execs and make suggestions. So we know we live in an or universe, but it's a really hard message to stick. So let's put the language of money to work here and see if we can make a better argument when this comes up in the executive session. And I represent product and my partner representing engineering are there with our sales and marketing cohort. Okay, so generally what traditionally we've said is, well, okay, yes, I know you really want that deal from JP Morgan Chase, and they have these couple of little tiny things they want, which aren't at all tiny and maybe impossible and may derail everything we're doing and destabilize our code line. But if we pull the platform team off our planned roadmap to do big customer thing X, we push the platform back a quarter. Not very inspiring. And no one at the executive meeting knows what it's going to cost to say no, well, to say yes. And everybody knows what it's going to cost to say no. So we're going to get steamrolled here and we're going to walk out of the meeting with one more thing to do. Let's translate. Okay. Hopefully, we did a bunch of work on the platform before today, and we figured out as a group that there's some rough guess that that platform next year and all the things it's going to enable are worth 10 to 25 million. There's your range, right? And so we get to say, we've agreed as a group, as an executive team, that the next 3.0 platform is going to enable products next year that are worth 10 to $25 million. So therefore, if we delay that for a quarter, that's going to cost us 3 to 6 million a quarter for as long as the delay goes. Okay. Now we're having the grown-up discussion about revenue because we can ask, so is this thing that you're going to push my platform back for big enough to fill the hole that this $3 to $6 million delay is going to create, right? Got to tell you, this is not a product operating model discussion. This is a money discussion, and it's how the big kids make decisions. Okay. So we, as product and engineering leaders, have to be prepared to show up here. Otherwise, I call it showing up to the gunfight with a slide roll. Not what we want to do. Okay, let's wrap. Let's finish. Some takeaways. I believe strongly as product leaders and engineering leaders, if we have product reporting to us, we need to drive some very vague order of magnitude consensus around the money outcomes on the few big bets that we're making with a few big projects we have. Otherwise, we have this endless reprioritization of everybody having a suggestion and nobody attaching money to it. Okay, so here's our three things. One, when we talk with our go-to-market partners, we talk about money and outcomes, not engineering and development processes, right? Order of magnitude guesses are just fine at the beginning because what we're doing is we're sorting the might do from the never do. And we get everybody in the organization starting to think about this as, is it worth doing instead of, is it worth engineering sizing it so we can decide? And then last of all, we need to remember and we need to remind our partners that every choice is an or choice and every team we have is, I've never found an engineering team that was um, undercommitted or less optimistic. Everybody's late. Everybody's doing too much stuff. And so we as product leaders have to present not some generic answer that says, I'll have to take something out of the roadmap. We have to name the thing that's going to be removed and make sure it's got a lot of pain and some money attached to it so that the executive team can make a coherent decision that says, the thing I'm giving up is worth less than the thing I'm going to take. Okay. The language of money, it's not easy at all. And it's not something that we teach product managers, but here we are. I've been writing about it for decades. Okay. This is me. That's where to find me, my new Portuguese phone number. Let's bring it back to Stephanie for a few questions.
Awesome. That was fantastic. As someone on the go-to-market side, definitely resonate with a lot of that.
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of great questions come in. Let's start with this one. So, Rich, you discussed using money stories to align go-to-market and product teams. How do you address situations where the data might be incomplete or too speculative to pin monetary value on new initiatives?
So I'd turn that around and say the data is always too speculative. The data is always incomplete. This is not science. This is not Monte Carlo simulations, right? This is saying, I'm thinking that if we add these features, we could get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6% of our folks to upgrade versus 30, 40, 50, 60, right? And I think everyone at the table has the gut feel that says, well, it's either 3 or it's 30. And we have actually very little disagreement about the number that we're guessing, as long as we don't try to give it to finance and have them do it to 8 decimal places and make a promise 3 years from now.
That was a fantastic response. Couple more questions here. We're
Sure,
getting some
go.
really good interaction here. Um, in terms of creating those money stories,
Yep.
wouldn't we want to factor in a quick swag cost to build? Is that factored in at all?
So I usually say that for round two. Okay. So let me do another quick bit of math. I've done a whole bunch of assessments of companies where we look at the size of the backlog and the throughput of the engineering team. And what we usually discover is that the backlog is 25 years worth of development or 40 years worth of development, right? If you flip that on its head, it says we're never going to do 96% of everything in the backlog. It's never going to get done, right? And so having engineering waste their time sizing anything below the top 10% is a complete waste of time and frustrates everybody. And by the way, a month later, even if you did a perfect estimate, it's wrong. So what I say is first, let's figure out what's worth discussing. So we do the revenue side first, and then we pick the handful of things. I don't ever want to size more than 2 or 3 times my throughput because it's all wasted, right? One last thought: there's a whole bunch of things this doesn't apply to, right? Bug fixes and quality and scalability, and there's a whole bunch of ilities that what we really want to do is we want to set aside 30 or 40% of our engineering capacity for things that marketing and sales don't ask for, because if customers are asking for scalability, it's long since too late, right? But for the things that are going to lead to money, we use these kinds of money stories to sort the reasonable, let's think about it more, maybe size it, from the never going to happen, stop wasting time, put a pin in it, don't even bother.
Yep, that's definitely a great way to look at it. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Go.
Um, on so what if on all these or choices, revenue driving teams always prioritize short-term gains?
Yes, they
How do
do.
we push back?
Well, so the first thing to do is we need to attach money to the long-term gains. Okay. When we say we're going to spend the next 7 years rebuilding the platform and there's no business outcome, um, we're gonna be working on that thing for 50 years because every quarter we're going to take people off of that because there's no business outcome. So if we're going to embark on a long-term thing, even though it's vague, even though it's order of magnitude, we need to say this platform restructuring is going to bring millions of dollars into the company somehow, right? And we have to have a reason for it, or maybe we shouldn't do it, right? And that becomes right now you can divide it over time and say, well, if we do the short-term stuff, we're pushing the long-term stuff back, and the long-term stuff has value, has money, and every quarter we push the major thing back. Well, if we do that, the executive team doesn't get to retire to Fiji so early, and so they have motivation to think about the long term, not just the short term, because we've made it real for them.
That was a great response. I think we have time. We'll try maybe one more
Let's do
question
one. If we got
here.
room for two, we'll have two.
Fantastic. How do you decide when our financial is an estimate that perhaps depends on the adoption of our product versus the deal of the go-to-market that can bring that ensure growth of the company?
I don't think that I'm going to take issue with that, right? So we should have some vague idea of how much goodness the next opportunity or feature is going to bring, right? We should, or we shouldn't build it, right? The next deal tends to be a one-time thing with lots of dragging along costs and hidden problems, and we highlight those. But if the next feature I want to build is worth a whole lot less than the deal that's in the door, then maybe we take the deal that's in the door. What we're doing here is we're trying to align the goals on both sides so we're in the same units. Now, there's long and short, but the units are money. The units are not adoption. The units are not usage. The units are not happiness and joy. The units are we get to grow, we get to hire more people, our stock is worth something, and we don't have to go out and get a new job.
It's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, Rich, for sharing your insights on navigating the revenue versus product tension. We hope you all have enjoyed the session, and we encourage you to stay tuned for more great conversations through Accelerate. Thanks, Rich.
My pleasure.